Carol, it's so nice to have a conversation with you again about our all-time favorite topic, subscriptions, but managing the churn rate that so often derails subscription commerce success. So thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah, real pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let me ask you a question. Do you think that subscription commerce companies spend as much time managing churn as they do acquiring new customers?
That's a great question. No, I would say emphatically no. At scale, once they've hit certain economies of scale and they've clearly established product market fit, we start to see that a little bit more. I would say that the companies that are thriving and really doing well, companies that are world class, top decile performers, yeah, they've put a tremendous amount of focus on back office optimization, efficiency, best practices for managing the book, but it's nowhere near as prevalent as we would like it to be.
So what do those guys know that the other guys don't?
I think a lot of it is if you focus on unit economics, intuitively we can say, oh, the higher the revenue I get per unit, per customer that I'm acquiring, the more profit I have per customer I'm acquiring, the better off my business is going to be as a whole. You can say that, and it's true, but how do you actually influence that? And so I think the companies that are in that top decile are the ones that really have a very data-driven approach. They spend a lot of time fussing about every little detail of the customer experience and journey. And then also specifically, they're looking for points of friction where maybe things are getting in the way to a detriment of the customer's relationship with the merchant. And that, of course, is very broad, but one significant component of that is what's the experience for our clients when it comes time for them to pay us for the services that we render? Is this as easy and frictionless as it should be? And unfortunately, because of the problems, some of which we've already spoken about in other conversations that we've had together, the problems inherent in the existing payment rails and the ever-increasing problems of fraud and the constraints that that's putting on issuing banks with being able to approve the transactions that they want to, we're seeing way more friction than we have at any point in history, actually, right now, especially with the pandemic and all this shift, more and more shift away from brick and mortar into card not present in subscriptions. It's just made the problem significantly worse.
So how are best-in-class subscription commerce companies solving the failed payment recovery problem that is the big source of friction that you described?
I think everybody kind of starts with, low-hanging fruit approaches. And there's things that anybody listening to this interview can and should be doing, regardless of whether you work with a third party to solve this problem. I kind of put it in three loose categories. There's the timing of when you process your payments. And generally speaking, we want that to be in the early afternoon Eastern time on business days. Generally speaking, that's when you're going to have, by and large, the best success rate in processing subscription transactions.
Really? So why is that? I mean, so it's the time of day and it's the time zone.
Yeah, the time of day and time zone, exactly. And this is across, billions of transactions spanning multiple decades that we've studied, and obviously with a very heavy bias towards the most recent transactions that we've seen. And we can get into, the deep rabbit hole of why that is, but let's just say that generally speaking, banks are more sensitive to transactions that are running at off hours. I think it's a higher likelihood that this is a compromised card with a bad actor running a transaction in the middle of the night, trying to see if it's a good card or not.
Right.
Some of the fraud systems are sensitive to the timing. In fact, all fraud systems at the issuing side are sensitive to the timing of when a transaction is processed. So that's one tip that I like to give to people, kind of like automate their batches if they're batching transactions to do that during business hours, which a lot of CTOs unfortunately say, hey, let's run it when servers are low and batch it at night. Bad idea.
Bad idea. Okay.
The second thing that I think that they do is they have a very careful consideration of what merchant category code they're in, their MCC. So every merchant account that processes on the Visa, MasterCard, or Amex rails has a 4-digit merchant category code associated with it, and making sure that you're in the right one. This can have a massive impact on your approval rate on fresh transactions. And then there's a lot of other things too, like data cleanup. Like we look at removing special characters from name and address fields, being careful to respect character limitations. And there's a lot of information available online on best practices around this. Deciding whether or not you're going to submit zip +4 or not zip +4. All these little things start to have an impact on your approval rates. Things like leveraging the recurring gateway flag, which most modern gateways support. When should you use that and when should you not, on which issuers should? And so if you start to study your data, you can see trends emerging and you can kind of do some of these things. So what we see is that the best performing merchants have that kind of approach. They're looking carefully at the data, they're studying their MCC, they're studying timing and data fields. And then the great thing about this is it's all behind the scenes, fully automated. Like we like to talk about, FlexPay, invisible recovery, right?
Yep.
Invisible recovery is the things that you can do that just make it so easy for your customer. You don't have to introduce this like interaction with them to create pain and frustration. Just fix it automatically behind the scenes, invisible recovery.
So when you and I have talked about this in the past, you've talked about an acronym, Payment Authorization Management, PAM. Is that still what you talk about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and this is again something that these top performing merchants really spend a lot of time thinking about. It's typically someone on the finance team. It might be someone more on the product team who's responsible for optimizing the P&L. But usually they're at a certain scale, there's someone who's focused on PAM, Payment Authorization Management, and really looking at what can we do to make our interactions with our customers as frictionless, seamless as possible, better for the merchant, more revenue, more profits, higher lifetime value, better for the customer as well, less annoyance, less frustration, and they're getting the goods and services that they signed up for.
Not managing it contributes to declines, which contributes to churn. Do you have a number for how much?
The average in America right now, debit rails are slightly better than credit rails for most issuers, but it's hovering in the 20% range.
Seriously?
Yeah, that's the typical decline rate for most high quality merchants, especially on annual rebills. That tends to be 20%. On monthly rebills, it can be in the high teens, slightly better. But yeah, it's a meaningful chunk of a merchant's business.
And you're suggesting that managing all of these little details, I mean, all the little things that ladder up to, the probability of a decline can decrease that? Can it ever eliminate it?
Yeah. So look, if you look at where your churn is coming from in your book at a high level, typically about 48% of all the churn is coming from failed payments. Wow. Unfortunately, what we see is that a lot of merchants think that churn is what's happening in customer service and people are dissatisfied with the product or service. If they're not focused on the failed payments, they're missing 48% of the problem.
Wow.
Right? And this part of the problem is, I think, the lower hanging fruit. And
hanging fruit, for sure.
Because it's just, these are customers that want to interact with you by and large, but there's something broken in the payment system, right? So focusing on that. And we see that the merchants that have a good focus on the failed payments piece, you can recover about half of all that with an invisible recovery solution.
Half of the half. So half of the half.
Yeah, half of the half. And then the other half of it, this is where you have to have world-class, digital engagement, whether that's texting or email. We see even some merchants using direct mail, right? But again, you want to do the least amount of that as possible. A, because it's expensive, but also we have really good data that shows that it's not just the churn itself. It's not just the failed payment itself that's bringing down lifetime value. Believe it or not, it also irritates customers so much that it turns into voluntary churn. So a customer that's having more failed payments, where you're reaching out to them more frequently by email and by text and by customer service, it's actually driving churn numbers up. You're giving them an opportunity to express their dissatisfaction, or you're just plain out irritating them. So it's kind of like a double whammy effect to the negative. Why it's not enough to just focus on what am I going to do to recover this 48% of my churn, the average, right? It's also what are the strategies that I'm going to use? I don't want to just go out and start mass emailing and calling these customers, because I'm going to create all kinds of trickle down problems.
Right. So what you're saying is that the automated invisible solutions, half of the half, but it also sounds like the other half, it can be addressed to save these customers in a different way. And absent that, it does escalate to a customer service problem, which even if you save the customer, it probably costs you something. You probably have to give them something, a free month or some other accommodation to settle them down.
Yeah, downselling to a lower price point, which may stick perpetuity. And there's also softer costs like brand damage, right?
Yeah.
influencing our net promoter score and things like that. We track all these things with merchants, and we see like significant downstream detrimental effects. Whereas the merchants that are really managing this well, you'd think that, like, having a solution that's maybe 3% better or 5% better, or like being able to recover more of these transactions using invisible recovery might be moving the needle only in a small way. But what we see with these merchants is there's an exponential return, especially in subscriptions. A 3% or 4% improvement here starts to compound, because you're not just fixing a transaction, you're fixing a customer. And you're keeping a loyal, happy customer who's satisfied with your brand, which has all kinds of downstream benefits. So it's really like this inflection point where if you manage it badly, you're starting to really fall off and you're in a miserable situation. Whereas, a slightly better strategy now starts to yield exponential rewards to the positive in the future.
It also sounds like, yes, you're saving a transaction and a customer, but you're doing that at scale, because if there are things like you describe, processing times or incorrect MCC codes, correcting that doesn't just correct it for one customer, it corrects it for lots of customers in that particular category.
Absolutely. It's across the entire business, just making all the unit economics of the business just like a little bit better, so that you get, again, this compound effect across the whole business. And again, that's why it's also important to make sure that when you're tackling these problems, that you're using the best possible solution to the greatest extent that you possibly can, to really, because that's how you're going to yield the benefits, which is, one of the reasons why we started looking at machine learning and AI, which, AI and machine learning, it's funny, it's because it's become such a buzzword, right, Karen? Like everyone's talking about AI these days. It's important to remember that, AI, machine learning, it's a tool, not a solution, right? You can give a really fantastic world-class tool to a surgeon, right? But he still needs to know, you still have to rely on the skills of the operator and the training of the operator to use that tool. So it's the combination of the two that really turns into it being meaningful. We've seen some solutions that purport to be AI driven that actually perform worse than rules-based systems, believe it or not.
Really? Why is that? Because it not in the hands of a skilled operator, don't try this at home kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. See, AI is about managing it's not just the volume of data, like billions of transactions being processed in the economy. It's the complexity of the inputs combined with the complexity of the outputs that are required in order to manage it. And so when you say, I want to take AI and focus on this problem, well, you really need to know what are the dials and levers that you need to move. Like we talked earlier about timing and transit, right? What MCC am I in? And all these different data fields. And the crazy thing is it varies across the 8,000 issuers that are in America, and it changes over time. And with a rules-based system, the challenge that you run into is you can say, well, if this, then that, if this, then that, and they're conflicting signals. One signal is saying do this, another signal is saying do that. So then you need a weighted algorithm, and it becomes untenable. But even still, a rules-based system that knows what all the dials and levers are in order to move them efficiently can perform extremely well. Whereas if you have to say, oh, well, we're just going to throw a bunch of AI at this problem and it's going to do better. No. You need to know exactly what it is that you're trying to get, what dials and levers you're moving, exactly how to do them. And so that's why the combination of lots of data, a really good operator, a trained team who knows exactly what it is that they're trying to influence, combined with the AI machine learning, actually yields these outsized results.
Are there dials and levers that don't necessarily lend themselves well to this invisible failed payment recovery platform? How does it adapt to the half of the things that can't be handled by something that goes on in the background without anyone having to intervene?
Yeah, we've seen some merchants, unfortunately, take very aggressive approaches with certain decline codes, even soft decline codes. So like, when you think about the decline code that comes back on a failed payment, generally speaking, as merchants, we divide them, and everybody, acquirers, networks, everyone, we divide them into two categories, soft and hard. Soft is like NSF, do not honor, generic bank decline. Hard is like pickup card, lost or stolen, destroy card, account closed, things like that, right? What's interesting is that not all hard declines are actually hard declines. Some of them are actually recoverable, and not all soft declines should actually be retried. And so taking a one size fits all and saying, well, I'm going to take my AI, I'm going to apply it across the board to all these different reasons, or everything within this particular reason code, regardless of what issuing bank, can actually get you into some serious trouble. And in some cases can actually turn into fines from the acquirer or from the networks if it's done at a large enough scale. So we do need to be careful about what we're doing here. It'd be like a heart surgeon saying, well, I can fix a broken bone with a cell salvage machine, right? Well, okay, right tool for the right problem in the hands of the right operator, right?
So I mean, it sounds like the people in these companies, the finance guys understand the problem. They understand the potential to solve for it. Do they understand all the different nuances that we talked about? And do they understand how to actually put together a solution to solve for it?
Rarely, but yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have come across some really wonderful, high quality merchants who tend to have really great culture, heavy focus on optimization and efficiency, dedicated, highly intelligent resources looking at this problem, but they are almost the exception that proves the rule.
Wow.
And even in those cases, and we've seen this happen where sometimes egos get involved and it's like, well, we have a 5-person team dedicated to this problem. I doubt that anybody else is going to know our business and how to manage it better than we do. And even still, a better tool that's trained across a much broader swath of data actually does generate lift. And then they were able to take those dedicated resources and put them on other problems inside of the business, because now they can work with this really great external solution. So I think it's always going to be a combination of the two. It's going to be having internal resources and doing things specific to your own product and your customer book, as well as working with the right third parties that are really focused specifically on that one problem.
And measured by that success, that lift, right?
Yeah, that's one of the fun things about this particular topic, is that it becomes really easy to measure which solution is winning versus not, right? We've recovered these dollars, and then 90 days later, those dollars and customers are still with us. Well, that shows that clearly you're doing something right.
And it also sounds like this is a way to really parse what is causing customers to leave, that may be product deficiencies or other things that are related to the product or service versus the payment which is being used to pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another interesting benefit that you just kind of triggered in my mind as you talked about that. Even marketing gets interested in this, because it turns out that if we can have a better system of really understanding where there's points of friction and we're managing those properly, and we're generating more lifetime revenue, but also critically more net margin per unit per customer, now all of a sudden marketing can go after a broader cohort, other cohorts of business that weren't profitable before. It can be like, now we actually have a broader pool that we can start to tackle, and we create more blue ocean for ourselves in the competitive landscape, because now our system is so efficient, we can actually go acquire these customers over here. And maybe they're not as profitable as these ones, but they're profitable enough. So you kind of raise that low watermark of who you're willing to go and attract and sell your products and services to, which again, the large players, it really helps them at scale to be running a more efficient business, a more profitable business.
So solving the churn problems helps grow new customer acquisition. It all works together.
It does all work together. It's not just about creating a more efficient and profitable business with better quality, more highly engaged and happy customers. It's actually also, ironically, helping you go acquire more of them.
Great. Daryl, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, I really appreciated this, Karen. Have a great day.
Thank you. You as well.